Zakthor adjusted his breathing apparatus and tried to calm his nerves. This was his first major assignment since graduating from the Ulvarian Diplomatic Academy. The air on Earth's orbital station Harmony felt too thin, and the gravity settings made his joints ache. Still, he had prepared for this moment his entire career. "You'll do fine," his supervisor Vexnar told him before the mission. "Humans are simple creatures. They respond well to direct communication. Just avoid their emotional triggers and you'll be successful." If only it were that easy, Zakthor thought as he watched the humans mingling at the reception. They were strange beings, only 2 arms, skin that came in various shades of beige to brown, and those odd flat faces with eyes that didn't properly swivel. How did they even see properly? The reception hall glittered with Earth's finest decorations. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, reflecting light in patterns that hurt Zakthor's sensitive eyes. Human servers circulated with trays of food, most of which would be toxic to Ulvarian biology. Zakthor had studied the diplomatic briefings thoroughly. Earth had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel and joined the Galactic Council. The Ulvarian Confederation saw potential in them as trading partners, particularly for rare minerals found on their planet and their surprisingly advanced medical technology. Diplomat Zakthor. Am I saying that correctly? Zakthor turned to see Ambassador Jack Miller approaching. Miller was tall for a human, with graying hair and a friendly face. Zakthor's translator device indicated the human was displaying polite interest. "You pronounced it perfectly, Ambassador Miller. Thank you for hosting this gathering." Zakthor bent his middle arms in the traditional Ulvarian gesture of respect. "The pleasure is ours. It's not every day we get to welcome representatives from a civilization that's been exploring space since our ancestors were still figuring out agriculture." Miller laughed, a sound that Zakthor's cultural training identified as self-deprecating humor. "Your species develops quickly. What you lack in time, you make up for in adaptation." Zakthor was pleased with himself. That was good diplomacy, complimenting the host species on a genuine strength. They walked together toward the large viewing window that dominated one wall of the reception hall. Earth hung below them, a blue-green sphere wrapped in swirling white clouds. "There she is," Miller said, his voice softening. "Home. Most beautiful sight in the universe, if you ask me." Zakthor examined the planet. From orbit, it didn't look terribly different from many habitable worlds, perhaps a bit more water than most. His scanner indicated complex weather systems, active tectonic plates, and a relatively young geological age. "Ah yes," Zakthor said, believing he was making pleasant conversation. "Your little mud ball with its excessive water and unstable tectonic configuration. Quite quaint for primitive species development." He meant it as a scientific assessment. Ulvarians valued precision in language. His home planet was primarily crystalline desert with stable crusts. Earth, with its shifting continents and unpredictable weather, seemed chaotic by comparison. But humans had managed to evolve in such conditions, which was impressive in its way. The room went silent. Zakthor noticed that several nearby conversations had stopped. He turned to Miller and saw the human's face had darkened to a reddish color. His translator pinged. "Warning. Expression indicates extreme anger." "I beg your pardon?" Miller's voice was quiet but tight. Zakthor replayed his words in his mind, searching for the error. "I simply meant that your planet has an unusual composition compared to many developed worlds. The high water content and geological activity would typically make consistent civilization development challenging, yet humans overcame this. It's quite remarkable." Ambassador Susan Wright, the head of Earth's diplomatic corps, stepped forward. "Diplomat Zakthor, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. On Earth, we have deep connections to our planet. We consider it beautiful and perfect, not primitive or chaotic." Now Zakthor understood. Humans had emotional attachments to their world of origin. This was mentioned in his cultural briefings, but he had underestimated the strength of the connection. He attempted to salvage the situation. "I apologize for the misunderstanding. In Ulvarian culture, we value worlds based on their stability and predictability. Your planet's dynamic nature is actually quite fascinating to us, but the damage was done. Miller nodded stiffly and excused himself. The other humans in the group drifted away, leaving Zakthor alone by the window. He noticed several humans, using their communication devices, talking quietly while glancing in his direction. By morning, things had gotten worse. Zakthor's translator program alerted him to a trending topic on human communication networks: your mudball diplomacy. His words, slightly misquoted and taken out of context, were spreading across Earth's information networks. Do you have any idea what you've done? Vexenar's holographic form pulsed with anger during their emergency communication. Humans have only one homeworld. Their entire cultural identity is wrapped up in that planet. The briefings didn't emphasize this point sufficiently, Zakthor protested. I was making a geological observation, not a cultural judgment. Intent doesn't matter in diplomacy, only impact. And the impact is that protests have formed outside our embassy on Earth. Their social networks are calling for your removal. Ambassador Wright has officially requested your recall. Zakthor's four hearts sank. Can I make a public apology? Explain the cultural difference? It's too late for that. You're being recalled effective immediately. The transport leaves in 3 hours. Vexenar's hologram flickered. This was supposed to be a simple assignment, Zakthor. Opening trade. Relations with a young species eager to prove themselves. Now it will take years to rebuild the trust you destroyed in a single sentence. After the call ended, Zakthor returned to the viewing window and stared at Earth. It really was beautiful in its way. Dynamic. Alive. So different from the ordered, predictable beauty of his own world. How could he have known that humans would react so strongly to a simple observation? In Ulvarian culture, one's home planet was just a place of origin, not a source of identity. Ulvarians prided themselves on their adaptability, their ability to thrive in any environment. As he packed his few belongings, Zakthor realized his diplomatic career was likely over before it had truly begun. He would return home in disgrace, probably reassigned to some data processing center far from the excitement of interstellar relations. Mudball, he muttered to himself. Of all the things to say, he had no way of knowing that this diplomatic disaster would soon seem trivial compared to what was coming, or that the humans he had insulted would someday become his people's only hope for survival. 3 months passed. Zakthor sat at his small desk in the central data processing facility in Ulvaria's capital city. His workspace was tiny but neat, with just enough room for his processing terminal and a small plant he had been trying to keep alive. The plant was failing, just like his once promising career. After the mudball incident, he had been reassigned to the lowest level of government service. His job now involved sorting and cataloging trade reports from across the Confederation. It was boring work, but it gave him plenty of time to think about his mistake. Zakthor was midway through categorizing a report on mineral exports when the first alarm sounded. At first he thought it was a drill. The Ulvarian government ran emergency response tests twice each year. But then a second alarm joined the first, then a third. The emergency communication system activated on every screen in the facility. "This is not a drill," said the calm voice of the planetary defense minister. "The Hive Collective has launched simultaneous attacks on our outer colonies. All citizens should proceed to their designated emergency shelters immediately. Further instructions will follow." The Hive Collective. Zakthor felt his 4 hearts beating rapidly in his chest. The Hive had been enemies of the Ulvarians for generations, but there had been peace for nearly 50 years. Why would they attack now? Around him, his co-workers were already shutting down their systems and moving toward the exits. Some were calling family members on their communication devices. Others simply stared at the screens in shock. "Zakthor," his supervisor waved from across the room. "Come on, we need to get to the shelter." The next few days passed in a blur of emergency broadcasts and rumors. The attacks had been well-planned and devastating. 3 outer colonies had fallen in the first day. By the end of the week, the Hive had pushed deep into Ulvarian space. The government tried to project calm, but Zakthor could sense the panic behind their carefully worded statements. When they announced the strategic evacuation of civilians, From the capital, everyone understood what it really meant. They were losing the war. All non-essential personnel will be transported to secure locations, the announcement said. Please bring only one bag per person. Report to your assigned evacuation center at the designated time. Zach Thor's evacuation assignment came the next day. He packed quickly, some clothes, his identification documents, a few personal items, and a small hologram of his family. His parents lived on one of the inner colonies. Were they safe? He had tried to contact them, but the communication networks were overloaded. The evacuation center was chaos. Thousands of Ulvarians crowded into what had once been a sports arena, each carrying whatever they could. Children cried, adults argued. Security forces tried to maintain order, directing people toward different transport ships based on their assignment numbers. Group 7293, please proceed to Transport Dock 12, a voice called over the noise. That was Zach Thor's group. He shouldered his bag and joined the line of dejected Ulvarians moving slowly toward the exit. The transport ship was designed for cargo, not passengers. Nearly 5,000 Ulvarians were packed into spaces meant for shipping containers. They sat on the floor, pressed against each other, as the ship rumbled to life. Through a small viewport, Zach Thor caught a final glimpse of his homeworld. The crystalline deserts shimmering in the light of their sun, the elegant spires of the capital city reaching toward the sky. Then the ship accelerated, and Ulvaria became just another point of light among the stars. Space travel was normally smooth in modern ships, but this transport was operating beyond its capacity. The journey was rough, with the ship's artificial gravity fluctuating wildly. Many became sick. The air recyclers struggled to keep up with so many bodies, making the atmosphere thick and stale. "Where are they taking us?" asked a young female sitting next to Zach Thor. Her scales were still the bright blue of adolescence, and fear showed clearly in her large eyes. "I don't know," Zach Thor admitted. "Somewhere safe, I hope." But safety was becoming harder to find. At their first stop, a refueling station near the edge of Ulvarian space, they learned that more colonies had fallen. Worse, the hive had attacked the Ulvarian homeworld itself. The news screens showed terrifying images of hive warships in orbit around their planet. The ship's captain gathered the refugees for an announcement. "Our original destination has been compromised," he said grimly. "We are sending distress signals to all potential allies requesting sanctuary." Days passed with no response. The transport, along with dozens of others carrying Ulvarian refugees, drifted through space, running low on fuel and supplies. Zach Thor heard whispers that some systems were actively turning away Ulvarian ships, fearing that helping them would bring hive attacks. Then, finally, a response came. "Attention Ulvarian refugee transport," said a voice over the communication system. "This is Ambassador Jack Miller of Earth. We have received your distress signal and are prepared to offer temporary sanctuary to your passengers. Please proceed to the coordinates we are transmitting." Zach Thor couldn't believe what he was hearing. Ambassador Miller, the same human whose planet he had insulted. Earth was offering them sanctuary when others had turned them away. The coordinates led to Alpha Centauri, the closest star system to Earth and one of humanity's first colonies. As their transport approached, they could see other Ulvarian refugee ships already in orbit around one of the system's planets. A human ship approached to guide them in. It was sleek and modern, far more advanced than Zach Thor had expected from such a young spacefaring species. "Ulvarian Transport 329, came a human voice. "This is Captain Ben Howard of the Earth Alliance Ship Guardian. We'll escort you to the processing station. Medical teams are standing by to assess your people's needs." The processing station was large but crowded. Nearly 50,000 Ulvarian refugees had arrived before them, with more coming every day. Human medical workers moved through the crowds, scanning for illnesses and injuries. Others distributed food and water formulated for Ulvarian biology. Zach Thor was standing in line for processing when he noticed a familiar face on one of the large screens overlooking the station. It was Ambassador Miller, addressing both humans and Ulvarians. "To our Ulvarian guests," Miller said, We understand you have lost much. While our worlds have had their differences, humanity will not turn away those in need. The Alpha Centauri colony has agreed to establish temporary settlements until your people can safely return home. The irony wasn't lost on Zakthor. He, who had dismissed Earth as a mud ball, was now dependent on human generosity for survival. As he moved forward in the line, Zakthor wondered what other surprises these humans might have in store, and what new challenges awaited him in this unexpected exile. The human transport shuttle descended through thick clouds toward the surface of Alpha Centauri B's largest habitable planet. Zakthor pressed his face against the small window, watching as the landscape came into view. Unlike the crystalline deserts of Ulvaria, this world was a riot of green and blue. Dense forests covered much of the land, while wide rivers cut through the valleys. "Welcome to Centauri Prime," announced the human pilot over the communication system. "Current temperature is 28 degrees Celsius with 78% humidity. Please remain seated until we complete landing procedures." Zakthor felt the shuttle bump gently as it touched down on a large landing pad. Through the window, he could see a sprawling complex of temporary structures stretching across a cleared area at the edge of a forest. Hundreds of prefabricated buildings were arranged in neat rows, with humans and Ulvarians moving between them. After the passengers disembarked, they were guided to a large dome-shaped building marked Processing Center. Inside, human workers sat at small stations recording information about each new arrival and assigning them to living quarters. "Name?" asked the tired-looking human woman at Zakthor's station. "Zakthor, former junior diplomat of the Ulvarian Confederation," he replied. The woman looked up, her eyes widening slightly. "You're the one who called Earth a mudball." Zakthor's scales flattened against his body in embarrassment. "Yes, that was an unfortunate cultural misunderstanding." To his surprise, the woman smiled. "Well, Mr. Diplomat, it seems you'll be calling our mudball cousin home for a while. Let's find you a place to stay." She assigned Zakthor to Living Unit 427 in Section B and gave him a small electronic device. "This will help you navigate the camp and translate between our languages. It also contains important information about camp rules and resources." Zakthor made his way through the crowded paths of the camp, which the humans had named Camp Hope. The air was thick with moisture, making it difficult for him to breathe. Many Ulvarians were wearing breathing apparatuses to filter the oxygen-rich atmosphere. Living Unit 427 was a simple rectangular building divided into small rooms. Zakthor was assigned to share with 3 other Ulvarians. The space was cramped, but clean, with 4 sleeping platforms, a small common area, and basic sanitation facilities adapted for Ulvarian biology. His roommates were already there when he arrived. They introduced themselves as Vertal, a medical technician, Nax, an agricultural specialist, and Kixar, a student. None of them recognized Zakthor from the diplomatic incident, much to his relief. "Have you heard any news from home?" Vertal asked as they helped Zakthor arrange his few belongings. "Nothing specific," Zakthor replied. "Just the same reports everyone's seen. The Hive controls most of our territory now." "My family was on Ulvar 9, said Kixar quietly. "I haven't been able to contact them since the invasion." They fell silent, each lost in thoughts of what they had left behind. The next morning, Zakthor explored the camp. Food distribution centers provided nutrient pastes formulated for Ulvarian digestive systems. Medical tents offered treatments for those struggling with the planet's atmosphere and gravity. Community spaces allowed refugees to gather, share information, and support each other. Zakthor was impressed by the efforts the humans had made to accommodate Ulvarian needs, despite having little previous contact with their species. Signs were written in both human and Ulvarian languages. Human workers had been trained in basic Ulvarian customs to avoid offense. At midday, Zakthor joined the line at a food distribution center. As he waited, he noticed a human woman moving through the crowd, speaking with refugees and making notes on a small device. She was tall for a human, with dark hair tied back from her face and skin the color of the rich soil they had passed during landing. When she reached Zakthor, she smiled. "Hello, I'm Olivia Martinez, Cultural Liaison for Camp Hope. I'm checking in with everyone to see how you're adjusting." "The accommodations are adequate," Zakthor said formally. "Your people have been unexpectedly helpful." Olivia tilted her head. "Unexpectedly? Did you think we would treat you poorly?" Zakthor's scales shifted in discomfort. "Given the history between our species, or rather the very brief and somewhat problematic history, I did not expect such hospitality." Recognition dawned in Olivia's eyes. "You're him, aren't you? The diplomat from the Mudball incident?" "Yes," Zakthor admitted, "though I would prefer not to be known for that single unfortunate comment." To his surprise, Olivia laughed. "Well, you're famous, or infamous. I actually studied your case in my Xeno-Relations class. It's become a textbook example of cultural misunderstanding." "Wonderful," Zakthor said dryly. "I've become educational material. Don't worry, most people here don't know or care about diplomatic incidents from months ago. We're all focused on the present crisis." She gestured around the camp. "Speaking of which, I could use your help." "My help? With what?" "You have diplomatic training. You understand both human and Ulvarian customs, at least somewhat. We need people who can bridge the gap between our species, help explain human intentions to your people, and Ulvarian needs to us." Before Zakthor could respond, a commotion broke out near one of the supply buildings. A group of Ulvarians was arguing with human security personnel. Voices were raised and postures on both sides indicated increasing tension. Olivia sighed. "Like that, for instance, come on." They hurried over to the scene. The Ulvarians were demanding access to communication equipment to search for information about their home planets. The humans were explaining that bandwidth was limited and being prioritized for official communications. "Neither side understands the other," Olivia muttered. "Can you help me explain?" Zakthor hesitated, then stepped forward. He spoke to the Ulvarians in their native language, explaining the technical limitations but also promising to work with the humans to establish a better information sharing system. Then he turned to the human security team and suggested a compromise, scheduled access times for different groups of refugees. Slowly, the tension eased. Both sides agreed to Zakthor's solution and dispersed. "That was impressive," Olivia said afterward. "See? You're exactly what we need." Later that day, Zakthor was summoned to the administration building at the center of the camp. Inside, he was introduced to Dr. Eric Dawson, the medical director, and Kelly Richardson, the camp director. "Ms. Martinez tells us you have a talent for diplomacy," Richardson said, ignoring the irony of her statement. "We want to offer you a position as a cultural liaison between camp administration and the refugees." "I'm not sure I'm the best choice," Zakthor said. "My diplomatic career ended in failure." "One mistake doesn't define your abilities," Dawson said kindly. "Besides, that experience might make you better at this job. You understand how easily communication can go wrong." Richardson leaned forward. "We also want your help with another project. We're establishing a broadcast station within the camp, a way for refugees to share information, find separated family members, and maintain cultural connections. We need someone who understands both sides. Someone who can tell your people's story to humans and translate human intentions to your people," Olivia added from where she stood by the door. Zakthor looked at their hopeful faces. Perhaps this was a chance to redeem himself, to use his skills for something meaningful, and maybe, just maybe, to make amends for his past mistake. "I will help," he said finally, "though I can't promise I won't make more diplomatic blunders." "That's all right," Richardson smiled. "We're all learning here." 6 months passed. The small broadcast station that Zakthor helped establish had grown into a vital communication hub for the refugee community. Every day, thousands of Ulvarians tuned in to hear news, locate missing family members, and maintain connections to their culture. The broadcast center was located in a repurposed storage building near the center of Camp Hope. Inside, humans and Ulvarians worked together, operating equipment that had been modified to accommodate both species. The main broadcasting room was Zakthor's domain, a small space with audio equipment, transmission devices, and a chair adapted for Ulvarian anatomy. "You're on in 5 minutes," said Ryan, the human technician who helped run the daily broadcasts. "Today's script covers the new medical protocols and the expansion of the Eastern Residential section." Zakthor nodded, reviewing the notes on his screen. The approved scripts were always factual but carefully worded to maintain calm and order in the camp. No mention of the increasingly grim reports from Ulvarian space, where the Hive Collective had consolidated its control. No discussion of the growing tensions within Camp Hope as resources stretched thin. "Also," Ryan added, "Director Richardson wants you to announce the visit from the Earth delegation tomorrow. They're bringing additional supplies and medical personnel." "I'll add it to the script," Zakthor said, making a note on his device. The broadcast went smoothly as they always did. Zakthor had developed a calm, reassuring voice that the refugees had come to trust. After signing off, he left the broadcasting center and made his way through the camp toward the weekly meeting of section representatives. Camp Hope had grown significantly over the past months. What began as a temporary settlement for 50,000 refugees now housed nearly 300,000 Ulvarians, with more arriving each week. The camp had developed its own rhythms and social structures, with representatives elected from each section to help coordinate with human administrators. The meeting was held in a large dome structure near the administration buildings. Inside, 20 Ulvarians and 5 humans sat around a circular table. Zakthor took his place as the representative for the broadcasting division. Director Richardson began with the usual updates: supply levels, medical reports, construction, progress. Then she moved to more difficult topics. "I'm concerned about the incidents in Section F last night," she said. 3 human workers were confronted by a group of refugees demanding increased food rations. The situation became hostile before security arrived. "My people are hungry," said Mevlar, the representative from Section F. "The nutrition paste is barely enough to maintain health, especially for those doing physical labor." "We're distributing everything available," argued Dr. Dawson. "The supply lines from Earth are already stretched thin. They're supporting nearly 1 million refugees across this system. Perhaps humans could eat less so Ulvarians could have more," suggested another representative. The room erupted in argument. Zakthor watched as months of cooperation threatened to unravel over limited resources. Similar tensions were rising throughout the camp. Just yesterday, he had witnessed a fight between refugees over sleeping space in one of the overcrowded dormitories. After the meeting, Olivia caught up with Zakthor as he walked back toward the broadcasting center. "That was tense," she said. "I'm worried things are going to get worse before they get better." "The refugees are losing hope," Zakthor agreed. "Each day brings worse news from home. The Hive shows no signs of withdrawing, and the ceasefire negotiations keep failing." "There are rumors," Olivia said quietly, "that some refugees believe humans are secretly allied with the Hive. That's why Earth isn't providing military aid to reclaim Ulvarian worlds." Zakthor's scales darkened with concern. "That's absurd. Humans barely know about the Hive. Why would they have secret alliances?" "Fear makes people believe strange things," Olivia replied. "And some are looking for someone to blame." They paused at the intersection where their paths would diverge. Olivia to her quarters, Zakthor to prepare tomorrow's broadcast. "Be careful with your words tomorrow," Olivia advised. "People listen to you. They trust you." Zakthor nodded, but as he continued alone toward the broadcasting center, his thoughts were troubled. The approved scripts he read each day were becoming increasingly disconnected from the reality in the camp. They emphasized patience and gratitude while ignoring the deteriorating conditions and rising tensions. That night, Zakthor couldn't sleep. He lay on his sleeping platform, listening to the sounds of the camp through the thin walls of his quarters. Somewhere nearby, a child was crying. In the distance, voices were raised in argument. The next morning brought news of a more serious incident. A protest near the camp's administrative center had turned violent. Several Olverians and 2 humans had been injured before security forces restored order. The protesters had been carrying signs with phrases like, "Tell the truth," and "Humans and Hive, allied against us." Zakthor arrived at the broadcasting center to find Director Richardson waiting for him. Her face was tense, her voice clipped, as she handed him the day's script. "Stick to this exactly," she instructed. "No deviations. We need to calm things down before the Earth delegation arrives tomorrow." Zakthor scanned the script. It contained a stern warning about unauthorized gatherings and reminded refugees that such behavior could jeopardize their status. It emphasized that humans were providing aid at great cost to themselves. It made no mention of the legitimate concerns that had sparked the protest. "This won't help," Zakthor said. "They'll see it as more propaganda." "It's not open for discussion," Richardson replied. "Just read it as written." After she left, Zakthor sat at his broadcasting station, the script glowing on the screen before him. Ryan counted down the seconds until they went live. 3, 2, 1, you're on. Zakthor stared at the script, then made a decision that would change everything. He pushed it aside. "My fellow Olverians," he began, his voice clear and steady. "Today I must speak truth. I was the diplomat who insulted Earth. I called it a mudball and dismissed the only home humanity has ever known. And yet when our world fell and we had nowhere to go, it was humans who opened their doors to us." Ryan was frantically signaling for him to stop. But Zakthor continued. "I have seen firsthand the enormous sacrifices humans are making to accommodate nearly 1 million refugees across the Alpha Centauri system. I have watched volunteers like Olivia Martinez work double shifts to ensure our children receive proper nutrition while taking smaller portions for themselves." Zakthor's voice grew stronger as he spoke from the heart rather than from a script. "We look down on humans for their youth as a spacefaring species, their biological inefficiencies, their emotional nature. Yet these same emotions drive them to help strangers who once insulted them. If we cannot learn from this example, then perhaps we deserve our exile." By now, Ryan had stopped trying to cut the broadcast. He stood frozen by the control panel, mouth open in shock. "Yes, conditions in Camp Hope are difficult. Yes, we all want to return home. But turning against those who saved us is not the answer. Tomorrow, speak to the Earth delegation. Share your concerns respectfully. Work with them to find solutions. But never forget that when the rest of the galaxy turned its back on us, it was the people of the mud ball who took us in." Zakthor ended the broadcast, his heart's pounding. He knew he had likely just lost his position, perhaps even his place in the camp. But for the first time since the Olverian crisis began, he felt he had truly served his people. Outside the broadcasting center, a crowd had gathered. Zakthor braced himself for anger, perhaps even violence. Instead, as he stepped through the door, the assembled Olverians raised their arms in a traditional gesture of respect. 1 year had passed since Zakthor's unscripted broadcast. That single act of honesty had changed everything, not just for him but for relations between humans and Olverians across the Alpha Centauri system. The morning after his broadcast, Zakthor had been summoned to Director Richardson's office expecting to be punished. Instead, he found the room filled with both human and Olverian leaders, including several members of the Earth delegation who had arrived early. "Your words reached beyond the camp," Richardson had told him. "Someone uploaded a translation to the human information networks. It went viral across Earth and its colonies. The results were unexpected and far-reaching. Human citizens across Earth and its colonies had been moved by Zakthor's honesty. Donations flooded relief organizations. Volunteer applications for refugee assistance programs quadrupled overnight. Most significantly, Earth's United Space Command, previously hesitant to become involved in the Olverian Hive conflict, called an emergency session. Within weeks, a coalition of Earth and its allies began diplomatic negotiations with the Hive collective. The humans brought something the Olverians had lacked: a fresh perspective and no history of failed negotiations. 6 months of tense talks followed, but eventually a ceasefire was reached. Now, 1 year after his fateful broadcast, Zakthor stood on a small stage in the center of what had once been Camp Hope. The refugee camp had evolved into a permanent settlement, with proper buildings replacing temporary structures and a growing integration between human and Ulvarian communities. A crowd had gathered for the anniversary celebration, faces turned expectantly toward him. 1 year ago, Zakthor began, I spoke truth when many preferred comfortable lies. I reminded us all that despite our differences, despite our misunderstandings, we share something fundamental, the capacity for compassion. The crowd nodded in agreement. Many held small glowing crystals, an Ulvarian tradition during celebrations. Today, the first group of Ulvarian refugees will return to our outer colonies, Zakthor continued. Thanks to the Coalition peacekeeping forces, the Hive has withdrawn from those worlds. It is a first step toward reclaiming our home. Cheers erupted from the crowd. Families who had been selected for the first return wave embraced each other. Human security officers, who would accompany them to ensure the peace held, stood at attention nearby. After the speech, Zakthor made his way through the crowd, accepting thanks and good wishes. His weekly broadcast had become the most popular cross-species program in human space, with billions of viewers tuning in to hear his insights on interspecies, relations and reports on the reconstruction efforts. Despite his fame, Zakthor had chosen to remain at the settlement rather than relocate to Earth or one of its more developed colonies. This place, once a symbol of his people's desperation, had become home. Quite a turn of events, isn't it? Said a familiar voice. Zakthor turned to find Ambassador Jack Miller standing behind him. The human looked older than when they had first met at that disastrous reception, with more gray in his hair and lines around his eyes. Ambassador Miller, Zakthor said, his 4 hearts quickening with surprise. I didn't know you were attending the celebration. I wouldn't miss it, Miller replied. And it's not just for the ceremony. I've been authorized to offer you a position. They walked together toward a quiet area, away from the main celebration. The evening light of Alpha Centauri's twin suns cast long shadows across the settlement. Earth wants to establish a new diplomatic academy, Miller explained. One focused specifically on preventing the kind of cultural misunderstandings that led to, well, my spectacular failure, Zakthor offered. Miller smiled. I was going to say learning opportunity, but yes, we need instructors who understand how easily these things can go wrong. And you want me to teach young diplomats how not to insult other species' planets? Exactly. Your experience, both the failure and the redemption, makes you uniquely qualified. Plus, your broadcasts have shown a rare talent for bridging cultural divides. Zakthor considered the offer. Teaching at a human diplomatic academy would be a far cry from his original career path, yet perhaps that was where he could do the most good. I would be honored, he said finally, though I hope you'll permit me to continue my broadcasts. They've become important to me. Of course, Miller assured him. In fact, that's part of why we want you. Your voice has become trusted by both species. Later that night, Zakthor returned to the broadcasting station. It was much more sophisticated now than the makeshift setup they had started with a year ago. State-of-the-art equipment lined the walls, and the studio could accommodate both human and Ulvarian physiologies. Ryan, who had remained his technical assistant through all the changes, gave him a thumbs up from the control booth. Special broadcast going live in 30 seconds. Zakthor settled into his chair and gathered his thoughts. When the indicator light turned green, he began speaking. This transmission comes to you not from a refugee camp, but from what I now consider my second home. Today I was reminded that wisdom often comes from our greatest mistakes. 2 years ago I insulted a human's planet. I called Earth a mudball. Today, I can tell you that this mudball has taught me more about dignity, compassion, and resilience than all my years of diplomatic training. He paused, looking out the window at the twin suns of Alpha Centauri setting behind the now permanent Ulvarian settlement that had grown around the original camp. Home isn't about the geological composition of a planet or its position in space. Home is where you find compassion when you deserve it least. For many of us, that home was found here, among humans who had every right to turn their backs on us but chose instead to demonstrate the very best of what sentient life can be. Through the studio window, Zakthor could see Olivia waiting outside. In the past year, their professional relationship had evolved into a deep friendship that transcended species differences. She had been instrumental in helping him navigate human customs and had stood by him when others doubted his methods. Tomorrow I begin a new chapter, Zackthor continued. I have accepted a position at Earth's new interspecies diplomatic academy. There, I hope to teach future diplomats what I learned the hard way, that before you can represent your people among the stars, you must first understand what makes a planet worth calling home. As he concluded the broadcast, Zackthor thought about the strange path his life had taken. A careless comment had destroyed his career, but had ultimately placed him exactly where he needed to be when his people faced their greatest crisis. His diplomatic failure had eventually led to a deeper understanding between species than any traditional diplomacy could have achieved. Outside the broadcasting station, construction continued on a memorial that would be erected where Camp Hope had first been established. Zackthor had been asked to provide the words that would be inscribed there. He had chosen them carefully. I came here as a refugee from a crisis partly of my own making. I stay as a student, still learning the most important diplomatic lesson. True understanding begins not with judgment but with compassion. As the twin suns disappeared below the horizon, Zackthor stepped out of the broadcasting station. Olivia was waiting with a small group of human and Ulvarian friends. Together, they walked toward the community center where the celebration continued. Two species united by crisis but bound together now by choice.